The Formula One spring break is over, and we've got to prepare for the first big lineup shift of the F1 fantasy season.
There's nothing fake about our marina here. Welcome to the Fantasy Formula.
Let's dive into what I predict is going to be the meta lineup foundation starting in Miami. This is the 7th highest scoring race last season and is one of only 6 circuits to finish above the median overtake total in each of the last 3 seasons. Now, Terry, I think that Miami has a lot of overtakes again, but we saw some super clipping at the end of the long straight in China, and Miami has another one of these really long straights. Could that limit the number of overtakes we see this weekend?
It could do. I think we've got this whole concoction of what's going to happen with FIA regulations, what's coming, upgrades, and I think we might see something changing in terms of what's happening in super clipping and what we saw back in China, but I'm not too sure how it's going to impact on everything at the moment because ultimately we're not 100% sure. Obviously, filming this, we haven't heard yet what the changes are going to be. They are looking at something to do with qualifying, and they are looking to stop that super clipping, which has been probably the biggest fan frustration, I'd say, with these new regulations. That's been the real bugbear of everybody, seeing cars flat out on a straight losing power. So I think that's top of their agenda to fix. There's some things they're chucking about on how to fix it. We saw Japan starting to move to a lower megajoules in terms of the battery. That's been muted about as an option. They've already done that. So I think that's a very quick, easy fix we might see. But I think we're going to see overtakes no matter what happens. I think this yo-yo overtaking is still going to carry on certainly for the foreseeable future because it seems to be a feature of the current regulations, if I'm honest.
And so if you're feeling good about these yo-yo overtakes persisting into Miami, we could have a really high-scoring week in F1 fantasy. Now, when we look at Mercedes' performance over the first 3 races, they've outscored the likes of Haas and Racing Bulls by a huge gap. It's between 65 and 75 points per race. And so having a second Tier A driver isn't going to make up all of those points. Now, this might be a hot take, but I'd switch to an Antonelli, Mercedes, Ferrari lineup regardless of your budget. If you've had bad luck with your cost cap, I'm not saying give up on cost cap building, but for the next 2 races, I'd take the points on these sprint weekends and pivot back to focusing on cost cap growth for Monaco. You can get into this lineup for as little as $100.4 million, but you'll be running double Audi and double Cadillac, so there's a little bit of risk at the low price points. But then once you get to $102.7 million, you have Lawson, Hülkenberg, Colapinto, and Bottas, so a safer lineup with some good cost cap builders in there. Terry, is there a point on this list where you would draw the line to switch your team to a Kimi, Mercedes, and Ferrari core versus it being a little too risky?
I feel that this sort of Audi and the Cadillac ones are risky for me still. I mean, we know that Audi have had problems with their engine. We know they're trying to work through it. That's actually their big focus for their updates. They've talked about reliability being their biggest issue. I think Cadillac have got that Ferrari engine. It's not quite secure so far in terms of Ferrari and their customer teams. But for me, if you've got a double Audi, double Cadillac in there, that feels like it might just be a step too far in terms of the risk and how many points you're going to lose compared to probably Racing Bulls. Yes, they've had their problems. We've seen obviously problems with both the Red Bull team and the Racing Bull teams with the engines, but they've been sporadic. I'd say they're probably a more reliable bet than the Audi engines at the moment. He says that now. That's probably going to come back and haunt me in Miami, isn't it? Let's be honest about it.
No, you make a good point about Audi and Cadillac. They're 2 of the riskier non-Aston Martin constructors on the grid. And so if you have all 4 of them, it feels like at least one of them's going to DNF at some point. So maybe at the 102.7 mark or maybe a little bit more expensive than that, you can start getting into safer lineups that have 1 or even none of those 4 drivers. Now, the promised land here, some of you might already be at a budget of $109.3 million. And that gets you double Haas, Lawson, and Hülkenberg. So I suspect we're going to see some of those teams as early as this weekend. Now, Terry, I really want to pick your brain on this next one, because if anyone can spoil the party for Mercedes, it's their engine customer in McLaren. Oscar Piastri finished P2 last time out in Japan, and he said after the race, quote, "Turns out we're all right once we start." So this is a team that usually brings big upgrades to Miami. What are you hearing about McLaren so far?
I think there's 2 ways to look at this. First up, every single team is going to be bringing an upgrade package to Miami. We haven't seen any factory work being halted. This break isn't a factory-enforced break. The team's been working all the way flat out. So every single team on the grid is going to be bringing an upgrade of some sort. The big question is, who's going to bring what? How big is that package going to be? And what sort of difference is it going to make? Now, we know that Mercedes engine is a damn good engine. We know that they haven't got a problem with that. We know that the problems McLaren have been chassis side, it's been integration side. We know they've been doing Pirelli testing. They had problems in Pirelli testing just this week. So they still got some stuff to iron out. But I think that when you look at their performance at last time out, once they got on top of the car, they're actually in there and they're in the mix. They're in there with the Ferraris, they're in there with the Mercedes. So I think it's evident that their car isn't so bad. There's just some initial teething problems they've had to get past to actually get there. And when they didn't start a race, you can't criticise their performance and say their car wasn't rubbish because they didn't even start the race. The question has to be, what could they have done if they didn't have those gremlins and could have raced? Would we have seen such a gap that we did have? Or actually, would they have been quite competitive on the races where they didn't actually take part in?
And so McLaren are looking to build off of this momentum that they started in Japan. And plus, think about these last few years for McLaren at this circuit. Lando won his first ever F1 Grand Prix in Miami a few years ago. McLaren were the number 1 and 2 drivers for fantasy scoring in this race last season. So it could be a disrupting week for McLaren, both in terms of the medal lineup. Should they replace Mercedes this early? I'd say maybe it's a little too early for that, but I can definitely see them disrupting the Limitless team. They could replace 1, 2, or all 3 of the Ferraris that were featured so prominently at the beginning of the season.
Quick reminder from us, don't forget to subscribe, like, and of course, you can join our channel because you'll be notified exactly when all of these videos drop.
Our members are taking part in an exclusive F1 Fantasy League against Terry and I, and they also get priority replies during our live streams. And I want to give a quick shout out to Francine, Juicebox, Rick, Race Maven, and BZ. You've been with us the longest, and we're so grateful for your support. Now, speaking of McLaren, they're some of the biggest movers in this week's betting lines. And Vegas has Piastri as the best of the rest after Mercedes at plus 800. So there's definitely some belief that McLaren's bounce back is for real. Now, up at the top of the grid, Kimi and George are now neck and neck for the race win. And Terry, I'm starting to wonder if we're underestimating George Russell at this point.
I think we're underestimating George. I think we're underestimating Mercedes a bit. But also, we've got to look at where these bet lines are taking us. These are all being taken without knowing what's coming. So, like I said, Fred Vasseur's talked about it. Toto Wolff's talked about it. This is going to be a complete reset. This is almost like the first 3 races of pre-season testing, and then we're starting the season afresh because of this break. Every single team has been on track during this break virtually. We saw Mercedes at Silverstone today doing a filming day. That's after doing 2 days with Pirelli. We know that Ferrari are due next week testing a big upgrade in Monza as well. We know that Audi have been on track as well. So the teams have been working behind the scenes to get these upgrades. And to be honest, they seem to all fall into certain categories. So some teams are working on engine reliability. So obviously Honda, Aston Martin very much focused on bringing their engine fixes to get them to the end of the races. Audi, they've talked about sorting out their engine problems as well. Then you've got the weight-saving measures, which is where Red Bull currently are. So Red Bull actually have the second best engine on the grid currently. Don't actually look like they're going to qualify for any engine upgrades. Had that qualifying trick by the FIA along with Mercedes nipped in the bud. Not that you think they've been using it looking at their performance, but they've obviously clearly got a weight problem rather than an engine problem. So their focus, they split their strategy last time out in Japan where Max ran the upgrades. Isaac obviously didn't. We've seen that before with Red Bull. That's a very common trick. Gives them a direct comparison. So they're on a weight-saving measure. And also Williams are following the same sort of principle. We know that Williams are inherently overweight. That's where their problem lies. They got that Mercedes engine. So again, they're focused on that. I think we're going to see a real mix of what teams are bringing. Some will bring that developmental package little and often. We've got 2 sprint races in a row. That's going to limit your time in terms of free practice sessions as well. We know that the weather in Montreal and Canada can throw all sorts. It's an earlier race this year as well. What's that going to do? So I think we've got this stage now where the teams are going to bring either a big package or they're going to bring lots of little stages to test one thing at a time, move on to the next one, but have all of these stages ready. So I imagine Mercedes have got 4 or 5 ready to move on to the next stage, but they may not bring them all to Miami. You might just see like a floor update and then another one brought in and so on. So I think these better lines, we've got to take it with a pinch of salt until we see cars on track. And I think we've also got to be ready to pivot because I'm not too sure we're going to know our best teams until we start seeing cars on track. So I think that free practice session in Miami is going to be absolutely crucial, to be honest.
Yeah, the evolution of these lines throughout the weekend is going to be very critical as we approach the lineup lock deadline between FP1 and sprint qualifying. We only have 2 sessions to make decisions about our lineups, especially for those of you considering Limitless. All of these teams are taking on and off different upgrade parts, and you have to make a Limitless decision based on so little data. So if you're not feeling totally comfortable about your Limitless team based on the little information that we have, it's totally fine to run it later in the season at a race like Monaco, where we have 3 practice sessions to see how the lineup is shaking out. So looking at chips, I expect some teams to play Limitless so they can run back their cost cap gains from Japan, and maybe a few people have FOMO after it worked so well in Japan, so I could see some folks playing it this weekend. No negative could also be a huge one since the weather here is very unpredictable. Terry, you and I were on our live stream last year for Miami. I locked in my Limitless team, and then all of a sudden it downpoured. Then Charles Leclerc went into the barrier on his outlap, and it was just pure chaos the last 15 minutes of our stream. And this is the kind of thing that can happen at Miami. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see a little rain here as well. And of course, if you're taking more than 2 transfer penalties or more than a -20, I'd use the wild card since that'll save you some of those penalties at such a critical juncture in the season. As we look at the budget gain targets for Miami, McLaren are on the rise, but I wouldn't play Norris or Piastri just yet on regular teams since their targets are still pretty high. But over in Tier B, Liam Lawson is the driver to have because he could DNF the Grand Prix and still gain value, so he'll be quite popular this weekend. Hulkenberg's Australia DNF is now off his 3-race average, so I think he's going to be a pretty popular ad since that Audi looks pretty punchy. Now, in this chart, Ollie Behrman's yellow, and I want to explain that one. He needs just 5 points for 0.2 million and 13 points for 0.6 million, so I still like him in Miami, but things get harder in Canada. If we assume he gets 14 points and goes up 0.6 million after this race, he's going to need 27 points to avoid a price drop in Canada. And that's a low overtake race, and it's usually wet. So unless he goes wild this weekend, I think we're going to see some teams move away from Ollie for Canada. But Terry, we talked about reliability issues up and down the grid. Do you see teams not just optimizing for performance, but also optimizing for reliability so we have fewer DNF penalties?
Yeah, so the big thing that's coming out of this is we've talked a lot about engines, what we can and can't do. So the biggest thing at the moment is we are currently with this engine freeze, but what you can do, you can make reliability fixes. Now, invariably, when you introduce a reliability fix, it actually makes your car faster. They introduce little tricks of the trade where it helps them with RPMs. So with Audi, they're looking at their turbo lag, which will get them off the line a bit better. We know they've been bogged down quite a bit on the start, so their thing is very much like Ferrari. We've seen those rocket starts, whereas they want to map it slightly differently. So with the development opportunities that come, we know that you've got to be 2 or 4% behind Mercedes, who are the current benchmark. We know that it looks like Red Bull don't qualify for the additional development upgrade opportunities, which is the ADUO that's coming. That's going to hit probably either Monaco or slightly later, depending on what the FIA decide next week. So the FIA, they're deciding when this comes in. It was supposed to come in round 7, but obviously we've had 2 cancelled rounds. But what we haven't seen is whether or not they're going to introduce it early or not. So what this allows the team to do is it gives you tokens to spend, which gives you extra cost cap, extra development time, and it allows you to actually make your engine better. So it is coming for the rest of the team. So you've obviously got Ferrari in that, you've got Audi in that, and obviously naturally Honda into the mix on those ones as well. So they can bring fixes, but we're not going to see them for a few races. Everyone else can make reliability fixes to their cars and to their engines. Now that invariably, 5 weeks of not racing will allow you to literally take that engine apart, let you see exactly what's gone wrong with it, that you get all that data from any gremlins you've had from the first few races and kind of iron those out and get a fix to it, which is what you'd expect certainly Ferrari, Mercedes and all the other teams do. So I think we might actually see reliability not being as big an issue, or certainly these little issues which, McLaren had where you couldn't start. I think these will disappear, and what we're going to get now is a much more reliable base, which is just purely based on what they've got from the first few races, what fixes have been introduced, ready to bring any development opportunities in a few races when they're allowed to do so.
Well, that would definitely be a relief for all of us, because this is a part of the season where we sometimes just try to play a game of whack-a-mole of trying to avoid the DNFs each and every week with our midfield and backmarker drivers. So if the teams are focusing on reliability and this could be a low attrition race, that'd be really good for my blood pressure. So I'm hoping that works out. Moving on to our tier list, Mercedes and Ferrari anchor the buy category. Meanwhile, McLaren and Oscar Piastri are starting to climb up the rankings, but until I see consistent performances from them, I've kept them on the fence. Certainly, you can keep them in mind if you play Limitless. Terry, besides some personnel shifts, Red Bull have been awfully quiet. Is Miami a circuit that suits the RB22, where we could see some signs of life? Or is there an upgrade package they can bring that gets them back in the top 5? Or are they still going to be in a rut for the next few races?
I'm not entirely sure. They're going to be working, like I said, on weight saving. We saw glimpses of it in Japan of what they're proposing. I don't know whether it's enough to bring them back into contention with what everyone else is bringing. And I think for me, that's still the question mark is they're so far behind in that midfield. Can they catch up to the Mercedes, the McLarens, or is that gap too big at the moment? Will we see a stage where they come part way, where they come into contention for I don't know, maybe sort of, edging on the podium if there's something that goes their way? Or is it just that gap is too big and at the moment the team's got too much of a steal on them? So even though they can make those inroads up, if everyone else is making it's like a rolling treadmill, isn't it? Every time you make gains forward, no one else is standing still. So it's whether or not you can make those 2 steps compared to their 1 to close that gap up. And that's currently where Red Bull are. It is definitely weight saving. They have definitely got upgrades coming. Their engine, like I said, is strong. So the basis is there. The question is, what they bring, is that enough to close the gap enough? Or would it just be enough to start bringing them into some sort of contention?
I suspect by the end of the day on Friday, I'm either going to have them as a sell, or if they really look good, a buy. But I see them moving probably toward the sell category just because Max and Red Bull are so expensive at this point of the season. Over in Tier B, I'm still okay with Ollie Behrman for one more week, even though I threw some shade at him earlier. So he's a buy for me, along with Ocon, Lawson, Hulkenberg, and Colapinto, who are probably going to be the most popular midfield drivers for their cost cap gain potential this week. If you get these drivers right, there's some big cost cap gains in it for you, but like we've been talking about, if you get that occasional DNF, a few of you have been hard done by these DNFs this season, it could set you back a little bit for the races ahead. Alex Albon finished P5 in Miami last season, but that Williams is still running heavy, so I'd avoid them until they strip off some of the weight through those upgrades that Terry mentioned earlier. Meanwhile, Bottas is just 2 races away from the $3 million price floor, so he could be moving up this list soon.
So we've talked about the upgrade package, Adam, and the reliability issues and all those being fixed. So is there anyone in that sort of sour category who, if there is an upgrade package that delivers after free practice and obviously the sprint race itself, could potentially be a dark horse in terms of being a smart buy for your team?
Well, we talked about them a bit throughout the show, but Cadillac could actually be a good cost cap gainer that would benefit a lot from an upgrade package. Perez needs a negative score to gain 0.2 million. Bottas needs under 10 points to gain 0.2 million. So if Cadillac can get their reliability up and get a little bit more punchy at the bottom of the grid, get some of those overtakes between the sprint and the Grand Prix, they could be some real cost cap enabling backmarker drivers that allow you to afford the Antonelli, Mercedes, Ferrari core at a cheaper price point. So that's probably the constructor I'm keeping the closest eye on.
And what about Perez for driver of the day in a Cadillac in Miami?
At an American circuit as close to Mexico as we get outside of COTA, it could definitely happen.
And of course, there is still time to join our feature league. All you've got to do, head on over to the Formula1.com website and join up.
So here are some of the top lineups for Miami. This is the team that we talked about at the top of the show. It's anchored by Antonelli, Mercedes, and Ferrari. And this is the flavor that I think most teams are going to run because of their cost cap success at Australia, China, and Japan. It brings in 4 of the top cost cap building midfield drivers and costs $107.8 million. So you get the highest scoring driver, the 2 highest scoring constructors, and you can even move Behrman out for the likes of Sergio Perez and get this team for as little as 105.8. So a great combination of cost cap building and point scoring on a sprint weekend. Now for this next team, I personally think everyone should move out of cost cap building for Miami and Canada, but some players may want to try something different, so this one's for you. Charles Leclerc's in as the number 2 driver to Antonelli, and some of you may even throw in Oscar Piastri for an extra $0.9 million over Leclerc if McLaren are looking really good. The big difference between these two options, though, is the Tier B constructor of Racing Bulls versus Haas. Terry, is there a driver that we should watch that could sway teams one way or another between those two constructors?
I think it's got to be Ollie Behrman's performance, hasn't it? He's been looking remarkably strong so far. We know, obviously, Japan, he had that incident and that crash, but aside from that, he's looked strong back into last season, into this season. Haas have looked really settled with that Ferrari engine. They've probably had the best start they've ever had to a Formula 1 season. I prefer the Ferrari engine over the Ford Red Bull engine just because of what we've seen so far. And I've chosen Haas a couple of times on my team as well. So I would think Ollie Behrman, definitely. I think Esteban Ocon, he's got a... There's a lot of rumours starting to swirl about Esteban's future, and I think he's got that situation now where he's got to start performing. Now, that normally goes 2 ways, doesn't it, for a driver? You either get a driver who comes out all fighting and shows exactly his worth, or you get a driver who tends to kind of crumble under the pressure. So I think that Esteban's at a real crossroads, especially with Haas looking good. It kind of opens them up to a possibility of a driver looking to move there. It gives them options. So for me, Ollie Behrman's one to watch on, but I would prefer Haas over Racing Bulls at the moment if I had to.
I totally agree. And Haas lead the grid in overtakes once again. It feels like we talk about this every year. And to your point about Ocon, he has 3 top 10 finishes at Miami. So maybe there's something about this circuit that really suits him. And so I like the Haas drivers either individually in our lineups or as that tier B constructor for those cost cap building teams. Last but not least, for those of you considering Limitless, this is a battle of the upgrades, and I'm going to boldly predict McLaren bring a big upgrade package and take over in place of most of those Ferrari assets. So all 3 McLarens, all 3 Mercedes, and Charles Leclerc on this team. Now, Terry, you still have Limitless open for one of your teams. What are you looking for on Friday to see, number one, if it's worth playing, and number two, which of these upgrade packages could sway you on how to round out your team?
I think Ferrari is the big question mark for me. Like I said, we know they've got a big upgrade package coming, but it depends on whether or not it works and gets them closer. So they've got a really good car at the moment. They've performed really well, and it feels like it's one of them that's going to push them on in terms of being able to potentially catch Mercedes, or it's going to put them a step back, and then that's where McLaren will still a march on them. So for me, I'm looking to see what Lewis and what Charles can do. They've both been quite evenly matched this season, both been really close together in terms of where they've been on track. We know they've got absolutely lightning starts. Be interesting to see if that carries on with the teams having that time to get used to the engines, get used to mapping some new starts potentially into them. I wonder if that advantage is still as locked in as what it was for the first few races, or whether or not the teams have found another way to kind of claw back on that one. But we do know it seems to be a characteristic of that smaller Ferrari engine with that turbo on it. So it might be something the teams can't quite get back. But for me, can they perform on Friday? If they do perform, I'll be really potentially swapping McLaren straight out for the Ferrari assets instead.
It's going to be a really exciting weekend once again, and I know I have a lot of questions about this weekend, but if you have any questions about Miami that you'd like Terry and I to answer, let us know in the comments, and we're going to pick a few to feature on our Final Thoughts video this Friday. We'll also have our live Q&A stream 1 hour before the sprint race this Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. in the UK to get you ready to lock in your teams. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching.